In this video, we are going to look at how we can format decimal quantities as prices automatically. And this is kind of the first time in this whole course where we're going to look at solving a problem that has real pragmatic value. This happens in real programs all the time. People need to be able to have some value that they're manipulating and then display it as a price appropriately. So let's take a look at some code. All right. So let's suppose that I have somehow computed the price, $1,234.56. Again, recall that decimals have an M on the end to indicate that they are money. Right? So how are we going to format this thing as a price? Well, the most obvious way to do it would be to simply say, let's concatenate a dollar sign to it. Right? If we look at this thing, sure enough, it is $1234.56. Now that's maybe acceptable. It seems to do the job. But now you start to think, well, what if this isn't dollars? What if it's pounds? What if it's yen? What if it's euros? What if it's Kenyan shillings? What if it is any number of things? Right? Some countries don't use a period as the decimal separator. They use a comma. Some countries use commas to separate the thousands from the millions and so on. Some countries use spaces to separate thousands from millions. It's all very complicated. So the good people who brought you the .NET runtime in the C# language have provided a large number of ways to format prices as currencies and other complicated formatting scenarios that we're not going to get into in this course. We saw in a previous video that there was a method, string.format, and that the method, the first argument to it is a format string, where if there is a curly brace and then a 0 and then an end curly brace, then whatever is in the first argument is substituted. We do a little search and replace, substituted in for that sequence. What I've done here is I've done that, right? I've got the 0 in curly braces, but I've put a :C after it. And this is a hint to the method, to the format method, that means when you substitute this thing in, please treat it as though it were a currency in whatever the current machine's locale is. So this machine is in the United States right now. I've formatted it to have all of the United States currency settings on it. So if I step through this thing, then we can see that now it has become $1, 234, period 56. Right? So this is now formatted as a price typically would be in the United States, with commas as the separators between the groups, a $sign at the beginning. I mentioned previously that in C#6 there's going to be a feature called string interpolation, whereby you can have a string where the literal begins with a $sign, and then you can use string formatting characters inside that string. And it's not all working just yet. This is an early version of Visual Studio, but in the final release, you will similarly be able to say, I would like to have an interpolated string, and I'm going to mark this particular part of the interpolated string as being a currency. So what if you want to format a decimal as a currency, but you don't want it to be formatted according to the default rules of whatever place your machine happens to be at the time? Right? Suppose, for example, I wish to format a document that has a price on it, and that price needs to be in British pounds, right? Because I'm going to be sending it to somebody in England. Well, fortunately, the same people who brought you the .NET runtime worked very hard on a class called culture info that handles all these kinds of rules for you. So you notice that up here I've added using system.globalization. We have a namespace. Namespaces are large groups of code organized by subject matter, in this case, globalization. I don't want to type system.globalization.cultureinfo every time I want to use it. So I say using up here, and now C# knows, oh, every time you see culture info, it's probably the thing in system.globalization. So I'm going to call a method, static method, on the culture info class called createSpecificCulture. And this thing takes a string. I'm going to give it a literal string that is EN-GB. There is an international standard for the format of these strings, and there is one for every combination of language and country that you could conceivably run into. So in this case, this is the English language, EN, and the code for the Kingdom of Great Britain is GB. Right? There's lots of these. There's no way that you could reasonably deduce what they are. You're just going to have to look them up on the internet. There are plenty of pages on what the different codes are for different combinations of language and country. And there have to be combinations for language and country because, of course, there are many countries that have different rules for different languages. So, for example, the way things are formatted in French-speaking Canada might be different than the way things are formatted in English-speaking Canada, although the currency is the same. All right, so we have this culture info object. We have a local variable called culture of type culture info. And this method creates a culture info for a specific culture. And then I'm going to call a property on that culture info called number format. And you recall that the property is a characteristic of something like its length or its color. In this case, the characteristic that we want is what is the way to format numbers for this particular culture. So I'm going to fetch that property. And now we have yet another type called number format info. I'm going to store that in a local variable called format. All right. Now I mentioned in the previous video that every value in C#, every type in C# has a instance method on it called toString. Usually that instance method does not take any arguments, but some types do have a toString that takes multiple arguments. So in this particular case, price, which is a decimal, has an instance method on it called toString, which takes two arguments. The first argument tells it what kind of thing am I formatting here. The C means currency, the same as it did up here. Right? And then I can hand it the numeric format info that I got out of the culture info for Great Britain. Right? So this means, given this price, convert it to a string as though it were a currency in Great Britain. Right? And now you might wonder, well, how did you know, Eric, that it was the letter C that you needed here, or the letter C that you needed here, for that matter? And the answer is, all of this is documented on the internet. There is no easy way to deduce what the different rules are. They're actually kind of complicated. There's lots and lots of different ways to format things. We are barely scratching the surface of them in this course. So anyway, let's see what happens. All right, so I've called price.toString, format as a currency, using the formatting rules for Great Britain. And what's gotten into this thing? Well, we see we have a pound sign followed by 1, 2, 3, 4, then a period, then 5, 6. So this has been formatted using the standard rules for Great Britain's pound sterling. Right? Now, what if I did not want the standard rules for Great Britain? What if I only wanted some of them? Well, it turns out that I can actually set properties on this format info. I don't just fetch them, I can also manipulate them. So you remember in a previous video, I said that the rule for the assignment operator, the equals key, is that the thing on the left-hand side has to be something that can change its value. Right? And the thing on the right-hand side has to be a compatible value. Right? So in this case, I'm going to say the currency group separator property is equal to the empty string. Or sorry, not the empty string, the string with a single space in it. Right? So if I do that, and then I call price.toString formatted as a currency, again with this format, then we can see now it's the pound sign, the number 1, a space, 234.56. Now there are lots and lots and lots of different ways to deal with formatting, not just of numbers, but of dates and times. And we'll look into some of that later on in this course, but we're not going to look at nearly all of it. So I strongly encourage you to use IntelliSense. You can say format dot, and then you can just see there is tons of stuff in here, right? You can say, OK, well, what's the decimal separator? We already saw that. Or we saw the group separator. You can say, what's the decimal separator? Is it a comma or a period or something else? How big are the sizes of the groups? Is it every 3? Is it every 4? All kinds of, there's just so much stuff in here. It's very, very, very complicated. And I encourage you to go on the internet, look at the documentation on it, and explore. There's a lot of really good stuff in here. All right, so to sum up, formatting things as prices is surprisingly complicated. So I encourage you to make the culture info object that was designed by experts at Microsoft do the work for you, rather than try to figure out, oh, I need to format this as dollars in America and pounds in Britain and euros in Europe and whatever else anywhere else. You can use property setters to build your own custom formatting if you need to. And by all means, look at the documentation if you have any questions about what are the different formatting strings. There are almost anything you can imagine you can do with a formatting string. If you want to say, I want this to be in parentheses if it's negative and left justified, there's a way to do that in a formatting string. Lots and lots of stuff there.